Put your hands together for the host, live from their home studio, Boo Lamb and Jason Rom.
Hey there, Dev Central community. Today is a security sidebar, but we don't have Peter joining us today. We actually have a couple folks from F5 Labs that are joining us today, and we're going to be talking about the Spring 4 shell news that's been happening lately, and just wanted to catch up everybody on that. Before we do that, though, just wanted to highlight something for everyone. Hold on here. Need to highlight something for everyone here. Sorry, I'm in the wrong view. This forum post that we have over here, all of our shows are actually posted in something called the DCC forum over on community.f5.com. And over here, you will find a thread for Security Sidebar. And what we're doing today is we're rolling something that was pre-recorded, however, will be on live to answer any questions. And following the show, if you have any other questions about the show or Spring 4 Shell, you can ask them inside that thread. So again, head over to community.f5.com. Over under groups, you'll see Dev Central Connects, and just request access. You don't have to meet any sort of requirements to get access to that. And then you will be able to see the show thread and ask questions of us in there. Moving along, though, I'm going to bring on my co-host today, or one of the co-hosts today. Jason, how you doing?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I am doing pretty good. We're moving along here. Got a couple things to go over. One of the things, though, was there was a recent release of the State of Application Security Report, Jason?
That's true. Yes, this is, I think, 8 years running now. It's the kind of the amazing little gift that Cindy Borvik and Lori McVitie really focus on. I think they spend 6 months a year on this report and kind of digging into what's happening in the industry and what's happening as a result of that at the enterprise and other companies as well. And so the report is out. Kara has a blog about it today. Where did my actual? There we go. She has a blog about it today. She links in there. So if you go to f5.company, we can throw the link in the chat. In fact, I'll do that here in a second. But read a overview, get the TLDR, and then there's a link to the report. So go out, get your report. It's fantastic every year. It's very insightful, and so you definitely don't want to miss that.
Yeah, fantastic. And aside from that as well, we have a couple other co-hosts today that we will bring on here. We got Malcolm and we got Dave Warburton joining us today as well. How you doing, gents?
Really good. How are you guys?
Very
Doing
good.
good.
Amazing. Awesome. Okay, so today, without further ado, what we have today for everybody is we have a pre-recorded show that has Peter David, and Malcolm all on. It's going to take up the entirety of the live stream today, but we didn't want to lose out on the interaction. So David and Malcolm are on. They're going to be in the background. We'll all be on the background, so you can ask your questions in the chat. If you just want to say hi, just say hi. We'd love to hear from you. But if you have any questions specific to Spring4 Shell, we will be able to answer that inside of the chat, in the comments, and over on the forum thread as well. We'll be able to answer questions after the show on there as well. So I'd love to hear from everybody. Okay, I think that's it. Jason, you got anything before we roll?
No, just in honor of my esteemed colleagues from F5 Labs, I wanted to go purple team. Oh, wrong arm on my BF5 up here. So, go security and let's
appreciate it.
All right. Sounds good. We will see everybody after this recording.
From our home studios around the world, please welcome the hosts of Dev Central's Security Sidebar, David Warburton, Malcolm Heath, and me, Peter. Hey there, community. Welcome to a special edition of Dev Central's Security Sidebar. If you're new to the channel, please give the subscribe a little nudge there. If you're into application security, application delivery, application services, if you're at all involved in any sort of delivering applications, which most companies are these days, you might want to give that a little hit. We think you'll enjoy our content. So today we're doing a special security sidebar covering the Java Spring Framework vulnerabilities. And I'm going to bring my co-hosts in right away. Welcome, David. Welcome, Malcolm. How you guys doing today?
Doing well, Peter.
Doing great, thanks, and you?
Doing good. Malcolm's here in the States, and David's out in the UK. So thanks for staying up late with us today, David. So the spring vulnerabilities. We usually open these shows with a little question. I know I've done time travel and everything else, but I think these are kind of the viewers are hitting this channel and hitting this video to kind of get some information about this particular vulnerability. So why don't we kind of dig right in? So just what was it? Last week, there were a number of vulnerabilities announced with a Java Spring framework. And just so I make sure I get these correct, these were CVE 2022-22963, so 22963, 2022-22965, and 2022-22950. Two of those were medium and one were critical, although one of them has been upgraded from a medium to a critical, the 6.3. So let's just kind of dig in. So these are the Spring4J framework. What does this Spring4J framework kind of do, Malcolm? What do organizations use this for?
Well, so first of all, I believe it's just Spring Framework. There's no 4 in it. That was sort of a remnant of people relating it to Log4j. But much like Log4j, it's a very widely used Java framework. So this is essentially a whole bunch of different frameworks, large archives of code, reusable code that run in Java, that are Java programmed in Java, and that they give you a whole bunch of features to allow you to quickly design apps, to handle routing within your app. They're web frameworks, so they enhance and speed up the development process for web applications in Java. And as such, they are very, very widely used.
And I'm sure readily available, and
absolutely,
people grab this code and put it out there.
Yeah.
So what is it about this particular, well, actually any one of them? I know each of them has their own kind of uniqueness about them. So maybe talk a little bit about these various CVEs and what they're all about.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so let's start at the top here. 22963 was a vulnerability in the Spring Cloud Function software. And so this is, as I understand it, and I'm by no means an expert in Spring, this was a portion of the Spring framework that was designed to allow you to develop essentially cloud APIs. As such, I'm not entirely sure how widely used this is, but it was originally given a medium vulnerability rating, but was upgraded after that to critical because people realized that you could actually use this technique to achieve remote code execution. So there was a kind of funny thing when this first broke where people were getting A couple of these different vulnerabilities a bit confused. If I recall correctly, 22963 and 22965 were both being called Spring for Shell, which sort of makes sense because they both eventually at least allowed remote code execution. But it's very important to be as precise as possible, clearly, when we're talking about these things because they are different. Although all three of these, if I'm not mistaken, actually have to do with the way that the Spring expression language ends up getting parsed by the various bits of code. So that was the top one, or not the first one, I should say, 963. 965 was in the Spring framework. It impacted Spring MVC and Spring Web Flux applications running in JDK 9. Now, this one was actually pretty interesting from at least my perspective.
JDK is sorry to interrupt, but JDK
Sure.
is just the Java development kit?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So this one was actually pretty interesting too, from my perspective, because it was actually essentially exactly the same vulnerability that Spring had back in 2010, which was quite a long time ago. Now that had been patched and fixed, or so it had been thought, a long, long time ago. Now the Spring code hadn't changed. There wasn't any like regression in the code. But what happened was that the JDK, there were some changes in 9 that actually allowed another path to exploit the same vulnerability, to get to the same vulnerable library, essentially, or section of the code. And so this one reoccurred. Yeah, and that was that I think has some very interesting things to think about in terms of your entire application chain, everything, all the different pieces that go into your app. Well, if you're really going to be serious about securing all those things, you need to be tracking the entire supply chain, which is a very, very difficult problem. Oh, go ahead.
So
Peter,
on that, I was curious. When I read, and I don't know if this is correct, but like you mentioned, it was fixed, and then there was a code upgrade, or the base code itself kind of went to its next version, and it was that next version that kind of then opened up the vulnerability again.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. What you can think of it sort of like, well, you might imagine a program with a number of functions. One of the sort of guarantees that one would hope when you're building software is that the underlying API, the application programming interface, or there's lots of different words for it, but essentially the way that you interface with the lower level libraries that you're using to build your stuff doesn't change, or doesn't have behavioral changes, at least.
Yeah.
In this particular case, there was some modifications in possibly even some new functions that were added to the JDK that happened to give attackers a different way in to get to a function within Spring that would allow you to leverage this sort of vulnerability. That was obviously unintentional on the part of the Java developers. And one could possibly say that the Spring developers maybe didn't do as complete of a patch back in 2010 as maybe they ought to have. But for the situation on the ground at the time, they had closed off all the possible ways in.
Yeah.
It was really just that they missed that after this change happened, that there was this other way in that somebody found. So,
Yeah. Well, millions of lines of code, sometimes.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's a difficult process.
So I think you were going to then move into 22950, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
just super quick. The 22951 is a denial of service vulnerability in the Spring framework. This one's just a medium. They all came out at about the same time. They all got sort of announced or disclosed, depending on how you want to look at it. This one was actually, I believe, the earliest one on March 28th.
Yeah, I would imagine just because 950 and then they jumped to 6.3 and 6.5. So you mentioned this was a denial of service, so they would kind of get in and almost DOS the system. What about the other two? What were some of the nasty things that a attacker could do based on the other two? I know you mentioned the remote code execution.
Well, that's the main one. That's the main concern. And remote code execution as a sort of class of vulnerability is
pretty nasty.
Well, how do I say this, right? I mean, it's sort of sky's the limit once you get that.
Yeah.
Once you get to the point where you can actually execute code on the remote server and you can decide what code gets executed, it's really a matter of creativity and art
Yeah.
at that point in terms of what you can manage to pull off with it.
Right.
Because you're essentially able to run code as the user or at the privilege level that the targeted app is running at.
Well, the other thing kind of worth mentioning there is actually, I mean, Malcolm, you make a good point that typically malicious code in an RCE can be running at the privilege level of whatever process is running, but with a number of privilege elevation or escalation tools and techniques are these days, that in and of itself isn't enough to kind of be certain that that's kind of as a wrapper around the capabilities for a particular RCE, when the initial kind of entry point might be Spring for Shell to get into to execute this initial code, but then if they can then chain a bunch of other exploits and then elevate privileges, then actually they could end up running code as an admin or root user on a device.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. That is the most common pattern that we see with these sort of web attacks is you gain some initial foothold using a web application vulnerability, preferably one that gives you code execution, but remote file inclusion, or there's a whole bunch of different ones that can get you to the point where you can start investigating the system, figuring out what user you're running as, and if you can actually get to the point where you can execute code on the server, depending on that server's security configuration or that execution environment's configuration, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to find either a configuration issue that you can leverage or, just a privilege escalation exploit to elevate your privileges. So you just stack those things on top of each other. You do more recon, you do more poking around, you shift around as much as you can, and you eventually find the point where you can get to the level of privilege that would allow you to, I don't know, do ransomware or exfiltrate data or what have you, whatever your end goal is.
Yeah, so that was kind of my next question. Are they looking to, exfiltrate data, ransomware, just the typical money making type things that crooks
Sure.
go after?
Yeah, absolutely. Or, include this server in your botnet, or run a crypto miner, or it's really whatever makes sense to you as an attacker for what you want to achieve.
So, David, have we seen some of the attacks in the wild, or we have any data to kind of look at these kinds of attacks?
Yeah, we do. It was interesting. So when this news first broke, we were working with the various threat research teams within F5, those that host, say, the subline services, those that create the threat campaign signatures for anyone that's familiar. So we have a number of ways that we can actually look for real world attacks. Basically. So anytime these kind of things kick off, we can immediately go to both internal and external sources within F5 to see what's going on. And I'm kind of looking at the chart here, which hopefully we can share and we'll share with our viewers later on. Attacks start off very, very slowly. So March 30th, we saw literally just a small handful of attacks. Now, by April 1st, that ramped up quite significantly. The peak that we saw was April 2nd. The kind of attacks grew exponentially by April 2nd, and then actually dropped off really, really quickly again. So from April 3rd, they were kind of dying somewhat of a death. Now, the attacks are still being seen. We're still seeing the attacks kind of testing our systems. We are still digging in to find out exactly what is going on, because clearly, groups such as ourselves, those that are doing threat research and security research, there are going to be a number of people that are, white and grey hat researchers that are just kind of probing, looking for vulnerable systems, looking to test various defenses. That said, what we have seen actually is and which is pretty typical for these kind of exploits and vulnerabilities, a slight shift in attacker techniques. And so actually we're seeing a number of bypass techniques that have been developed just over the past few days to try and circumvent signatures that have been put out by various vendors. So that's something that's kind of worth considering. There are a number of ways that you can mitigate from this kind of attack, whether you've got an F5 device or service or something similar. Generally, the kind of class of defense, if you're having something in front of those vulnerable applications, generally will be some kind of signature to look for the malicious kind of payload or style of attack. And those can either be very, very specific or very general. And of course, the more specific a signature or pattern match might be, the easier it is for attackers to kind of, to morph those techniques and perform bypass those signatures or rules. And obviously, the more generic a signature might be, the more likely it is you're going to get false positives. So it's been an interesting kind of shift, seeing how attackers are changing their payloads to try and circumvent various signatures that are being put out.
Interesting. Yeah, we've on the Dev Central on community.f5.com, we have a number of solutions out there. One's an iRule, and then David mentioned CERT. That's our security incident response team. They've put together a batch of signatures for our security solutions, the advanced WAF and the F5 distributed cloud security infrastructure to protect against this. But are there also, so I got two questions actually on your back with the credential stuffing report and how you went around, kind of the timeline of attackers, testing the waters and then maybe jumping on it before the announcement. And then once the announcement hits, right, it's a free for all, and then everybody knows, and maybe there's patches or mitigations in place, and then it drops off. So this kind of instant rise, and then maybe not a sudden cliff, but then a fairly quickly drop off. Is that kind of the normal graph that we see with these kinds of vulnerabilities?
It can be.
Not necessarily attacks.
Yeah, it can be. Typically what happens is, particularly when people release proof of concept code for vulnerability like this, which happened in this case, people are very quick to essentially copy and paste, and we used to call them script kiddies. People that maybe with a kind of lower skill or experience level from a hacking point of view or attacking point of view will essentially take the sample proof of concept code, barely change it, make some very simple changes because they essentially don't understand it. They're just running some code that someone else has created. And I use those to very quickly go and scan, look for vulnerable systems and see what they can find. But then once people are patching, once signatures and mitigations are in place to protect against those initial kind of opportunistic kind of hackers, those script kiddies, if you like, tend to give up and go on to the next thing. The long tail is going to be a combination of people attacking systems that aren't patched, and we all know that there are going to be many systems that remain unpatched for months or years to come, and those more persistent attackers which are which do genuinely understand the exploit, how to actually bypass signatures and mitigations, that continue tweaking the exploit code to continue looking for patched but potentially vulnerable systems in the future.
Right, because that initial patch may have its own, the rush to patch may provide its own holes in the process.
Right.
Pretty interesting. And recently we've also, because I said before, the log4j was just probably not even a month and a half ago. And then this one, are there any similarities between, say, log4j and the Spring vulnerabilities, or they're just kind of two separate frameworks and they have their own issues, and we just happen to get into this snowball roll of vulnerabilities getting exposed?
Well, yes and no, I think would be the answer. For 22950, or sorry, 22965. There are some similarities in the sense that what we have here is user supplied input or attacker supplied input that's being interpreted out of context. But that's about, I think, as far as you can kind of take it. One of them allows you to change the configuration of the Spring framework and start writing your logs into a different file than was originally configured, and it allows you to write your logs into a file that is accessible via the web to the attacker. So this is a little bit different than log4j, which was you were leveraging the logging system, and the logging system was interpreting the contents of the log file as something that it was going to go execute or it was causing it to take an action, which would then allow you to download attack files from somewhere else, from a remote system. In this particular case, you're changing the log file to a user accessible or a attacker accessible location, and then the attacker then causes the app to log further attacker supplied data into that file so that you could create a web shell, essentially write code into that file that you could then access via the web and have it executed. So it's only really at the most generic level that these have anything to do with each other or any similarities. In my opinion,
I think no, completely spot on. I think what's interesting, and this isn't particularly unique to say about these two, because this kind of flaw and vulnerability is becoming super common and has been common for a long time, which is deserialization, which is really a class of interpretation kind of vulnerabilities, which is to say code that implicitly trusts user input. In the log4j example, it wasn't specifically user input. It was supposed to be log data, but invariably could contain user supply parameters and strings as well. And it's exactly the same with Spring for Shell, in that the deserialization library and function that takes that string and converts it back into some kind of data format that the library and function can understand, just implicitly trusts that whatever is being provided to it is trustworthy. And as we're seeing, any time that we can get any kind of user supplied input to any function, it absolutely has to be verified. It can't be trusted at all. So to me, this is another example of a deserialization vulnerability.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think that it's worth calling out that these sorts of vulnerabilities in a generic sort of sense, in the sense of having content within a stream that's being processed of data that has special meaning depending on who's interpreting it, has been leveraged for vulnerabilities for literally decades. I mean, I remember way back in the day, there were actually control characters that you could place into a stream that, if it was interpreted by a particular terminal, would cause a file to be written or something like that, right? So these are the generic sort of class of this is ancient, and the solution is just as ancient, which is either don't interpret stuff in user supplied data streams at all, or be extremely careful and make sure that what you're getting is what you're expecting.
And I think
harder to do than to say, mind you. It's actually quite a challenging problem, but
yeah, completely. And I was just going to add that, I think we're going to continue to find these kind of vulnerabilities for years and years to come, where we've had functions that were written, the core functionality was written maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, and no one's really looked at it or considered it much since. People just have used it, so they continue to use it, and you kind of just assume it's fine and safe to use. And it's not till researchers start prodding it and start realizing, oh, hang on, there's another deserialization function here, that they find there's a problem. So I think, give it a few more months, we're likely to find another one of these issues.
The other day we got a comment there's what is a web application firewall, one of our Lightboard lessons that John did, and the quick question was like, can WAFs protect against LDAP injections? And that's just like protecting or checking proper input validation. So this is just one of those kind of long-term kinds of things where, whether it's a system or a person, it's important to check those inputs. And there's that, I remember we used to play around way back in the day and you guys probably have it on your site, for the SQL injection, where true equals true, give me all the answers, whatever that is, to retrieve.
Yeah, I mean, the often kind of used example we'd give for SQL injections, which it still works on a number of systems, is as you said, you add to the end of the search string something that is always true, like 1 equals 1. Well, 1 is always going to equal 1, so the search result will always be true, and therefore return, whatever you ask for.
So definitely a WAF in this, I would imagine, WAF with signatures in this particular situation. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, patches have been issued for all 3 of these CVEs.
Absolutely. Yes.
So make sure you patch your systems. And it's, I know you had mentioned, Malcolm, the reopening the reopening with version 9, I believe you were talking about. Is it pretty much the entire framework, or are there, like, I'm imagining older systems are vulnerable, and even the newer systems seem to be vulnerable. So it's just important to patch it no matter what. Is there any other things folks can do? We got input validation, we got, toss a WAF in front of it, we got patch your systems and the signatures.
Yeah, there's several things. I mean, the first thing I'll just call out that is, for most modern WAFs, you have more capabilities than just signatures. You have statistical methods that can be applied to identify unusual traffic and warn or block on those. That can be, if you implement it correctly and ahead of time, can be extremely effective. I think that's actually sort of the next step in all of this for WAFs is increasing the use of machine learning and AI and statistical methods to analyze traffic. But on top of that, a lot of this comes down to system hardening. I mean, in for example the typical scenario for 22965, if the attacker was successful in generating a web shell and accessing it, you would see essentially a sub process of the Java process on that particular server that was doing things that were not like what a web app should be doing. So, making network connections, viewing files all over the place, what have you. So visibility becomes a huge, or observability becomes a huge issue. Knowing what is normal and being able to spot the differences past your network edge and into your actual execution environments. And there's lots and lots of tools in that space that can be used to harden, to detect, to apply controls all over the place there. There's of course the much broader level of we could go from this one small vulnerability, as we mentioned earlier, this is just the initial foothold. There are so many different controls that you can apply throughout your entire environment to segment your networks, or keep a user from here logging in over here. I mean, on and on and on. Like that's the entirety of the modern enterprise security toolbox applies. But at least at the initial thing,
and we talked about recently even the simple fact of making sure a lot of people will check and inspect the data coming in to protect against the certain types of attacks that are out there. But it's even more critical to keep an eye on whatever data is going out and make sure it's, only the data you want to go out.
Exfiltration filtering or again, observability is hugely important, just because it isn't even so much about the specific attacks, but given that we know that in many situations, the goal of the attackers is to exfil data or exfil it before, say, for example, implementing some kind of ransomware or stealing IP or credit card numbers or anything like that. Exfiltration detection, outbound traffic monitoring is highly important. Absolutely.
Very good, fellas. I appreciate your time today, talking about the Spring Framework vulnerabilities. So if you want to learn more about the Spring Framework, you can certainly read the article on f5labs.com. Let me just make sure I check it. And it's just literally called, What Are the Spring for Shell Vulnerabilities? This one was written by you, Malcolm. Nice job.
With help from my teammates, as always.
We're going to, Peter, just to mention as well, sorry, we're going to be making sure that we update that article. So with some of the new bypass techniques that we spot, some of the new kind of frequencies of attacks, we're going to make sure. So it's going to be somewhat of a live article. So even those people that might have already read it, we definitely encourage you to check back towards the end of the week and next week as well.
Absolutely. And we'll be making sure we socialize that too. Over on the Dev Central channel, one of our employees actually on the crowdsource area put a iRule out there to protect against it. We have a number of as I mentioned, the security incident response team has some mitigations and solutions on our support.f5.com site. And then there's also we have a big IP AFM, the advanced firewall module. They have protocol custom signatures. So within the protocol inspection tool, you can also deploy those solutions to help mitigate against these vulnerabilities. I think we're probably going to, as you mentioned, David, that these are going to, continue on. And not to say I look forward to another one of these in the future where we're talking about vulnerabilities, but
we'll be back talking about this soon before you know it.
So if you like this content, please hit that subscribe button. And for Malcolm, for David, I'm Peter, and we're with F5 Networks. Thanks for watching.
Alrighty, thank you, Peter. And I'll bring back our co-host today. Hey, folks, how are you doing in the background there?
Pretty good. Yeah, I'm just I'm missing my my bright pink shirt that I was wearing for that recording.
We had some interesting chat going on here, actually. I'll highlight a couple of things here. Josh brought up this one. I'd be interested to know what those things were and recall that interesting times you had a note there as well. Jason looked, or David, it looks funny where you were. It doesn't look like England then.
Yeah, injection attacks are pretty much always are related to interpretation, which is, again, to repeat myself, another example of what this class of attack is, and we're going to carry on seeing them, indefinitely. But it is really fascinating how different kind of interpretation attacks can have different results in different platforms. It can be everything from denial of service to completely resetting devices to, in some cases, leading to full remote code execution.
Yeah. Some good tips at the end there, though. So if folks want to scroll back on that. Daniel, thanks for that comment there on the Teslas. I'd have to look into that. I would not be happy if that was possible. And hello. And yeah, Josh, I guess you joined us maybe a minute after we mentioned that, but today's show was pre-taped. Peter's taking care of some personal stuff today, but he did want to be there with the guys, and so they pre-taped that one, and I think that worked out well. We were able to kind of polish up the edit and take some time in that, and so we'll see some more of those coming up soon, I think. Otherwise, folks, we're here now, or we were on during the recording, but any questions that you would have, head over to community.f5.com, find your way into this DCC forum, which is marked as a group on there. You can leave comments and questions inside of there. There's that one there that says April 12th, 2022 Security Sidebar, and we'll drop all the links in there as well for all the relevant stuff that was talked about today. So thanks, gents, for joining us today. It was great to have you on, and I guess we will see you next month. So for now, I'll sign you guys off, and Jason and I will just chat a little bit about the shows that we have coming up.
Sounds good. See you next time.
Guys. All right, and Jason, did we load the show? No, it's on here. Yes, we did. Okay. On Thursday, we've got blockchains and NFTs part 2. Kevin Jones will be joining us again, and we will be talking, or he's actually going to do a live demo of a blockchain application that he will spin up live. So we always love a live demo, right?
I do. Yeah, we got to talk about the brass tacks of blockchains and NFTs last time. Now we actually get to see the stuff. So, we know about the mysticism and the pushback and all that. Let's look at what it really is down deep in the technology. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, would love for everyone to join in with questions on that one. I'd love to explore use cases there. How does this stuff apply to everyday type stuff? Next one, Jason, you've got the core coming up.
I do.
I didn't put the description on there.
Excuse me, people. The Rom family has been fighting stuff for a month now, and I'm mostly through it. I still have a little bit of a cough. My apologies. Yes, next Tuesday on the core, I'm going to be digging into, the whole back and forth you have as a customer or, a partner on behalf of a customer. You have some kind of an issue you're trying to troubleshoot, and you get the update from support saying, hey, I need this file. I need you to run this TCP dump in this way. I need MD5 checksums and I need a quick view and all these things. And so, the margin for error is high because, there's a lot of little steps that you have to do. And wouldn't it be great if you could automate some of that? So I spent a little bit of time last week, the week before, kind of digging into the possibilities, and it's a proof of concept. It's by no means a mature solution, but we're going to talk about it because I've made some progress. It's out there on GitHub already. So if you want to, fork it and start iterating and making it better, awesome. And so we're going to talk about it. We're going to go into the code. We're going to go talk about the solutions behind the code that led to it, and then have a conversation.
Yeah, that's cool. What a cool community project as well, right? It's on GitHub, so people can go, like you said, they can go fork it, or they can go issue a PR and see what you think of their suggestions and kind of go from there.
That's right, and it's a first step. I'm going to talk about roadmap as well because there's a lot to be had beyond just gathering a packet capture, what could you really automate in analyzing that capture? Because a lot of, you have tribal knowledge in isolating, maybe there's some sequence issues, maybe there's a protocol problem between, your speaker and receiver. And, how much of that stuff do you know in your head that you have to train a computer to do? And so let's look at that. Let's look at what's possible and go from there.
Yeah, should be fun. Do we have one more comment here? Oh, Josh asked for the link, so maybe we'll just throw that into the DCC forum over on Dev Central as one of the follow-up notes on there. Okay,
I can drop it here real quick too as well. I think that might be it. If not, it'll be accurate in the one on Dev Central. But I think that's right.
Cool. Alrighty, folks. We will see everybody on Thursday. Thank you very much, Jason, for joining me today. And we'll see everyone next time.
Take care, community. Oh, I had a task here and I blew it. Here we go for real, people.
This week on Dev Central Connects, when we find ourselves in wonder, Brother Kevin comes to see, speaking words of wisdom, Web 3, boom, boom, boom. And in our hour of streaming, there is blockchains and NFTs. There will be an answer, Web 3. Kevin Jones, Senior Product Manager with NGINX, joins Boo and Jason to continue their conversation about blockchains, Web 3, and NFTs. This time, he'll be doing a live demo of how simple it is to bring up a blockchain application. Join us for any live questions you have about these latest trends, 9:30 a.m. Pacific, Thursday, April 14th, 2022. Dev Central Connects is live every Thursday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific. The link in the description sets your reminder. NFTs, Web 3, and NFTs. You will get your answers, Web 3.